changed, because we have like 45 minutes left. I'm gonna hear from Lisa and Becky first, and then we'll hear from Willa, if that's okay with Willa, because we know she's here if we need more time. So Lisa, welcome. Welcome back. I don't think you need the introduction, but please identify yourself for the record, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about H645.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Letha Cipriano. I am the Executive Director of Bennington Center for Restorative Justice, and thank you for inviting me here today. For over 40 years, the Bennington Center for Restorative Justice has been providing restorative justice programs, and I'm proud actually to have been at the helm of this agency, believe it or not, for 19 years. I know you're like, you're only 35, how could you do that? But it's truly, it's been a whirlwind, and I've been very fortunate. We started as just a court diversion agency back in the early 80s, and since have grown to a full countywide, full-service community justice agency. We work with individuals of all ages, ranging from children in schools dealing with truancy issues, to juveniles at risk of entering the justice system, to helping folks coming back into the community from incarceration. We work in partnership with state and local agencies, and nearly 30 volunteers represent Bennington communities. And we serve about 1,600 individuals a year in our one agency. So we are a unique agency, being the first in the state since 2010 to get all 3 contracts.
2 separate.
Sorry.
One's
No, that's
the House
okay.
bill, and one's the, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
One's the House bill and one's the appropriations final bill.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So I know there's been a lot of talk about all the different funding sources, but we are one of those agencies that get all 3. The Attorney General's office, DCF, and DOC. And
Do you
so
also receive town funding?
we do. We get town funding, school contracts. Our budget's of almost $1 million. I go after grants from the Vermont Community Foundation, private foundations. So most of our funding is state grants, but I do, as a 501c3 nonprofit, we're able to go after other grants and private grants as well. So my testimony here, because there are 22 or 23 centers throughout the state of Vermont that do restorative programming, I am representing my opinion and that of my agency. There's no way I could get everyone's opinion, but what I can say, talking to my colleagues across the state, that I believe we are, with confidence, I can say we all support whatever we can do to expand restorative justice programming in the state. We believe restorative justice not only saves the state considerable money, we believe our programs are instrumental in reducing recidivism and reducing the recidivism rates in our community. So what I'm just going to briefly talk about, because I know our time is short, I have talked to Erica Marthage, our state's attorney. I've talked to my colleagues. While the bill wasn't perfect in the beginning in the House, they did allow us to come in and have a voice in the process. And we're pleased with some of the changes for community side of things, some of the changes that have happened. The biggest thing is that this bill moves us in the right direction of geographic equity. There are communities in the state that have real robust pre-charge programs, and there are other communities in the state that have absolutely no pre-charge programs. And so talk about equity, this bill is helping move us in that right direction. One of the big changes with Erica and myself agree, and I think I heard from you this morning, is it allows prosecutors the ability to set their own policies. I believe the first version of the bill prescribed certain offenses were going to be the eligible offenses. It was very much a predetermined set of rules and policies we would follow. It has since morphed into, we recognize there's local needs in different communities. And so allowing a state's attorney to develop their own policies is a big step, I believe, in the right direction. It allows them to override the policies, which I think is important in our community. And I can say we've been doing pre-charge with juveniles for about 8 years. I met with our chief of police, state's attorney, and myself when we recognized we were getting way too many juvenile cases. I would say clogging up, but that's entering the court system that really didn't belong there. So I, and the chief said, what if we looked at what are the type of offenses that she feels comfortable to just divert, let law enforcement send them straight to CRJ rather than involving the justice system. And she actually wrote off, I'm good with these. If there's certain charges on here that don't show up, have them call me. She wants the law enforcement to call her, and she'll kind of give them yeah, go ahead and do it, or just send them my way. I want to take a different look at the case. So she has still some involvement in what cases come to pre-charge. We also we do a risk screening on every juvenile through our barge program, every juvenile that comes into family court. And we're able to provide that screening result to our state's attorney and the judge. And she'll say, oh, we're going pre-charge. It's kind of like what direction. So she'll say pre-charge, diversion, or she may say, I'm going to send them over to DCF for more involvement, not based on the offense, like you were saying, which is super important, and we agree. It should be taking a look at the whole person. So it is working, and we are using it, and it just kind of expands that into other areas of the state. So the bill affords victims their rights, just like our court diversion program does. It's cost effective. It's the quicker response time. We can get kids, law enforcement gives us a referral. We can get it in a day or two. Whereas, of course, we all know going through the traditional court system, it could take weeks, months, no, weeks isn't right, months, and possibly a year to get through the system. So that's a real important aspect. And I think one of the most important is it's going to move under the Attorney General's office. It mirrors court diversion post-charge. So it's the same statute. It follows the same direction as regular diversion. So now we're just adding pre-charge diversion and now post-charge diversion. And we have, the AGO has a proven track record. We have seen over the 18 or 19 years that Willa and I have been working together, we've seen the evolution of YSAS.
You realize you're dating both of them.
I know. We were laughing the other day. We're like, oh my gosh. But we agreed to retire together when the time comes. So, but we did. We have brought Tamarack on board. We've developed the YSAS, the DLS diversion. It's just a natural progression to include pre-charge in with those programs. So basically that's it. Oh, and I think the most important, and it streamlines things. And I guess I will toot my horn in Bennington County. It is streamlined. You know, the state's attorney, the law enforcement, the community, they know where to go. They go to one agency, and it just makes sense to streamline it. Everybody calls everything diversion in our community, even if it's a reparative case that's coming in through the courts. They say, oh, go to diversion. It just makes sense to put this in with diversion.
Maybe I have a question. Not counting constables, there's, I believe, 4 law enforcement agencies in our county. The sheriff, Bennington, Manchester, and Winall. Correct. And are they all different that you deal with and giving different?
For referrals?
For pre-charge.
Yeah, well, we get a lot from Manchester. So we have a set of guidelines, and we have a referral form. So basically.
So you already have policies.
Correct. For juveniles, we haven't branched into the adult arena yet. And we've been doing pre-charge in schools. So we talked earlier about that sort of disorderly conduct or those kind of behaviors happening in schools where school interventions may not have worked. So law enforcement will be called in, and I'm actually meeting next week with Paul Can and the middle school to make sure we're using pre-charge more to getting sort of as a progression. You know, school does their thing rather than just cite them into family court. Let's try pre-charge. We get the law enforcement involved, we get the parents more involved, If they don't successfully complete the pre-charge, what happens is then it gets kicked into family court. So as sort of the next progression.
The truancy case.
Those would be behavioral cases.
Okay.
We do truancy too. We have a contract with the schools. So for juveniles that are truant, that doesn't fall under our pre-charge
Okay.
program. That's barge. We do that under our barge program.
Okay.
So I know, right? But there's all that continuum. Like the barge program that funding is just amazing because it allows us to be creative. It's what allowed us to get our after-school program off the ground, to get truancy in all of the elementary schools and middle and high school in the communities, and to be creative preventively, not only reaction. Harry, it's preventative as well. So yes, we do truancy work, but we don't consider that pre-charge because it's not like a delinquency. It's more of a chinned case. So I think that kind of sums up where we're coming from. Is it perfect? Probably not. Is it a good step when you hear these other communities that have great pre-charge programs and then you're sitting in with your colleagues in a meeting and they're like, oh, we don't have pre-charge. I mean, there's not a lot of equity there for people in those communities. So how we can keep moving us forward as a state with more uniform policies and practices, I think it's a win-win for the state. So.
Questions for Lisa? Thanks so much for making the trip
Oh,
up
absolutely.
from the deep south.
Right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Our next witness is Becky Penberthy.
Penberthy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
From Burlington Community
That's a tough
Justice
one.
Center.
Right, so for the record, I'm Becky Penberthy and I work at the Burlington Community Justice Center. I have been a restorative justice practitioner for about 20 years. So for 16 years, I worked at Lamoille Restorative Center. And for the last 2, I've worked at the Burlington Community Justice Center. So I have this unique perspective of working at what some have called a one-stop shop, and then some others, I'm working in Burlington where there are other community justice centers. So if you have questions about my opinion about differences, I'm happy to answer them. I work directly with the folks referred to the Justice Center for pre-charge or direct referrals, and I support and supervise other people who do that work. I'd like to talk to you sort of about what happens at the ground level. So it's my opinion that we do our best work when a referral arrives very quickly. In Lamoille, we didn't have pre-charge. In Burlington, we do. I might get a case within a day or days of the incident. So I've had cases where the incident happens on a Thursday, the case comes on a Friday, or within the next week. But it doesn't take that much time. And my experience with the court diversion program, the current court diversion program, is that we can receive referrals 2 or 3 months and sometimes years after the crime has occurred. I'm working with an individual now, and his last charge was in June of 2022, and we just got those cases about a month ago. So the quickness that we can attend to people through the pre-charge program is, I think it's a benefit to all of us, but mostly the community and to the victims and to the person doing harm. So I think in pre-charge, we can do our best work when we can reach out to victims right away.
That assumes the person's been caught right away, right?
Right. So if I get that, I'll tell you a story. Are you up for a story?
Sure.
Okay. And some of you may have heard this because I testified before the House earlier on this case, and I have permission to share this information. So one of your colleagues here in this building was driving her car, and she takes the same route every morning. She was going to get her coffee. And at some point she saw someone sort of that seemed to be following her, and she acknowledges that she might have pulled out in front of them or something, but wasn't really sure. She was like, maybe I've done something wrong. And so she pulls in to get her coffee, and she sees that this person has pulled in behind her. And so she thinks better of it, like lots of us would, and decides, well, I guess I'm not going to get my coffee this morning. So as she's pulling away, the person in the car behind her stops their car, gets out, reaches down behind their seat, and she thinks he's gonna get a gun. He pulls out a hammer, and as she's driving away, he sends the hammer sailing and it goes right through her back window. She continues to drive and finds a safe place to pull over, calls law enforcement and the police department. They caught him right away. They got there were a ton of witnesses. Someone had, phones are great these days for some things. And law enforcement gathered him up and talked to him. And for several reasons, they decided to offer him pre-charge. And a lot of, for the victim in this case, she was like, this isn't unlawful mischief. I mean, to some of us, unlawful mischief sounds like it might have been a little bit fun, right? Yeah. So some crimes just have bad names. So he was given a referral to the Burlington Community Justice Center for unlawful mischief. He took immediate responsibility with that law enforcement officer and had no criminal history. So you can make a good case for it. I don't know any of this, and the next day in my email, I get the referral. So I'm not opinionated about what comes in the referral, but I need enough in the referral to know what I'm talking about to the person responsible and to the victim. So I open up this case, and the name was familiar to me, but you can only make small assumptions about people's names because there are plenty of people with similar names. And I read it and understood personally that this case must have been really, really impactful. And this is kind of stupid, but when I was in high school, I totaled the driver's ed car by backing into something. And I can still to this day remember what it sounded like when I smashed that back window. So I knew what this person had heard in that moment and how big that was for her. And mine wasn't a hammer, right? So I called her on the phone, and I'm really committed to, whenever we can, reaching out to the victim first, because it's their case, right? It's their case too. It's not just the participant or the defendant or whatever folks call them. It was her case too. She was very upset about the referral, angry with the name of the charge, thought they should go to jail. And we've heard this. We understand that people think this. And I helped her to understand what would happen if he went to jail. Like I am in court. My office is in the courthouse in Burlington. I'm in court of law. I know exactly what the steps would be. And she would be isolated from him and from that situation, and he would not be able to talk to her. So I said, do you want to talk to him? She said, yes, I want to talk to him. So I worked with one of our victim service specialists at the Community Justice Center, and I brought them together. It's something that I would call an impact meeting, where in that moment, he has to take responsibility and tell his story about what was happening for him and why he took those actions. And she gets to ask him questions about, like, what were you thinking? And what's happening in your life right now that caused you to do such a thing to me? And it took all the monster stuff away for her. You know, when she got home and she didn't know who it was, there's like a construction crew working outside of her house, and they had hammers. And so she thought, maybe he's there. Maybe he's been stalking me. Maybe he's angry at me for a reason. This victim also happens to be a trans person, and she thought that maybe she was being targeted and this was more of a hate crime. So she got to hear from him that he absolutely did not know. He was not even seeing her as a person at that moment. He couldn't see her as a human being even. So that was really meaningful to her, that she got to learn that it wasn't about that even. And he acknowledged, and the best part of the meeting was when he said, when I learned you were trans, I felt even worse about this because I know that trans people are targeted all across the country and outside of this country, and I didn't want that to happen for you. She would never have heard that any other way. Like, if this case had proceeded to court, maybe she would have. I don't know. We could have done a restorative process like a year later, and it would have been impactful. But just how quickly this all happened and how quickly we're able to wrap around people through our pre-charge program in Burlington I think is important for the public, for victims, and for people who are causing harm. Because what if he was somebody who was just starting and he was gonna do another crime, and this could have stopped his trajectory. Perhaps.
Well, there's also clear evidence that the quicker you resolve a crime, the more likely it is to have a deterrent effect.
Absolutely.
On both that individual as well as other individuals who might commit the similar crime. If you don't think you're gonna get caught, you're more likely to continue to do the crime.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's when people say, what's the best, and what's the best piece of public safety? And I said, it's the fear of getting caught. Like, just that low level enforcement can sometimes help
Yeah, I mean,
every one of us.
We prove that on the interstate every day, don't they? When they go by us. And we're doing 75, and so think about what they're doing.
I notice every time you tell the story, your speed goes up by 5 miles.
Well,
80.
I was late, Tuesday morning because I got stuck in construction somewhere, and so yeah, it was 75 Tuesday. They're still going by me.
So
Until I saw the police officer.
Oh.
And then they jammed on the brakes and almost caused an accident.
I did see someone get pulled over in Burlington yesterday, which hardly ever happens, so they're all on notice.
Going on to, those don't get pre-charged.
So, I think that is the best pitch that I can make in terms of how fast it is, especially in our current climate of backed up courts. The other piece that I run into in Burlington is that there's no way for me to know if somebody is working with another restorative justice agency in Vermont. So when I'm working with just a court diversion case, court diversion through the Attorney General's office has access to Odyssey, the court's case management system. So I can look up so I get a referral, I can look them up and see if they're working in any other county in Vermont. And if they are, I'm immediately going to ring up that county and just say, so I see that you're working with Bill. How's that going? We just got a case for him. Is it appropriate that we got another case for him? And is this a case you would like to have? So we can, I think Letha talked about streamlining. We can streamline these processes and not have like 2 or even 3 case managers.
645 help to do that, or do we need language that would help to do that?
I think it helps to do that because it would bring pre-charge under the Attorney General's office, and then we would have the programs working in concert together. So even if like in Chittenden County, Essex still had pre-charge and Burlington had pre-charge, there would be agreements and things in place where we would be communicating with each other. There would be structures for that. I don't know if Willa is shaking her head over my shoulder.
She's not doing anything.
I saw a little head.
Okay.
So, like I did get a case last week where somebody had, I think it was, I know his name in my head. So he had a diversion referral, and then during his diversion intake, he said to me, oh, and I have to go to the such and such CJC later today. And I was like, oh no. I was like, what for? And he said, oh, I got this, the law enforcement officer, I did this, he's sending me there. And I said, okay. So I did call them and I said, do you feel like you would transfer that case to me? There's no structure really, like we can transfer cases. It's not a structured thing in diversion. It's very structured about how we transfer cases and track that. And they did, obviously, we work well together, so they agreed to transfer it. But if he had never said that, I wouldn't have known. He would have had a case manager in that town and a case manager with me, and it feels like we're wasting money and time. We don't have a lot either. Those are my points, unless you have questions for me.
Thank you very much. Other questions for Becky? Becky, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Our next witness and final witness for this morning is Willa Farrell, Director of Court Diversion at Pretrial Services, who was here yesterday, so making regular trips over here. And the Judiciary Committee. Welcome back.
Thank you, Senator Sears. Willa Farrell, Attorney General's office. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on H 645. I just want to echo what I think a couple of people said. This seems like a long bill, but because I'm familiar with the diversion statutes, it actually seems not as lengthy as it looks. Much of what is in here is current law. And the essence of it for our office is the expansion of diversion to include pre-charge diversion. Our office supports and recognizes the logic of having pre-charge diversion and post-charge diversion under the same umbrella in our office, and we would happy to assume this responsibility. I wanted to speak to a few points which I think support the goals of the bill. And the first was, as you've been discussing, about geographic equity, which I think many people are trying to promote for good reason. And I think this bill moves us in that direction by balancing prosecutorial discretion, which is fully retained as I read this proposed legislation. Prosecutors are required to have a policy, but their policy is theirs and uniquely theirs. When a few years back, I think Ben alluded to this, there was an addition to the diversion statute that required prosecutors to explain on the record why they might not refer a case to diversion. That was an attempt to promote geographic equity. And I will say that it's the message that the legislature sent with that was effective. There was no directive other than explaining, the prosecutor's discretion not to make a referral. And I remember shortly after that, one state's attorney saying to me that legislative intent made her pause and ask herself and her deputies, is this an appropriate case to go to diversion? So I think there's the balance here that is sort of the essence of good legislation, of respecting different interests.
Thank you. I actually may have asked you this exact same question in a class that I took this summer, and I'm wondering, because my concern, as I've stated, is around geographic equity, but also larger equity. And we know from data and statistics that charging decisions are often biased. And I'm wondering if this will help keep track of data around who is getting pretrial supports and services and who is being charged for similar offenses. Because I think when I asked you the question previously, it was like, we don't really have a good way of tracking that. Would this help with that?
It would. So currently within court diversion, we do have a statewide database that our office manages, and people enter each case, including demographic data. And we report that in our annual report to the legislature. So we would mirror that within the pre-charge realm, and could provide those data on a countywide basis, which I think would be an indicator. I'm not, an academic researcher, but I think there would be some data there that could be instructive.
Wonderful, thank you.
I think that in general, the other aspects of geographic equity is what happens on the ground, what people experience, both victims and people who cause harm when they go through services. And we have worked hard. I work very closely with the program directors as well as case managers to ensure that what the work is consistent. We have a pretty rigorous manual with guidance, and we would bolster that in context of the pre-charge arena. This bill does provide additional clarification around notification and rights of victims, which I think is very important. It reflects current practice within court diversion, but it's very different to have it in law versus simply an agreement amongst programs. As Becky just spoke to, the quick response to crime, I think, is a very important element of any justice system, and I think this bill does help move in that direction. I also think that keeping low-risk individuals out of the system is helpful. We know from the research that when people are at low risk to commit crime, it's better to keep them out of the formal processing system. And I strongly, firmly believe that a restorative process is very effective in meeting the needs and underlying issues for behavior, as we've just heard an example. And finally, I think that this is a cost-effective approach to crime. I also appreciate in here the provisions of confidentiality that do not currently exist in the realm of pre-charge. Nor does access to consulting with a public defender, which I think are important protections and guardrails for people who are referred to a pre-charge program. So that's my brief overview. I have a few comments about specific language in the bill, if that works to go forward.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Maybe I'll ask them now and then
Certainly.
we get your take on some, or maybe the same places.
Sure.
So on page 3, says on line 12, the Attorney General may require local financial contributions as a condition of receipt of program funding.
Mm-hmm.
Is that current law, or is that something?
It's current law, but we
It is?
don't, it's.
Do you actually require
We
them
do
to get funding from the town of Bennington, for example?
No.
So why is that there?
Well, actually, I will reflect on my I think I've been in my job 18 years and it predated this, so I'm not sure when, I think it may be original language, Senator Sears, from the
Well,
70s.
if we don't do it, I think we should take it out.
I think it,
Because it sounds like if you don't get funding from the town of Bennington, you can't operate in Bennington County, which we do, I think we do get.
You get 9, 10 different towns.
Yeah, I've forgotten the amount I voted for.
We should take it out.
Huh?
I agree, we should take that language out.
But the language should come out. I don't think it's necessary. The next question is on page 54. And that's, do we need the Restorative Justice Program Working Group report in the Attorney General's office?
so section 4, as I read it, relates to the work that is funded by the Department of Corrections, the
Mhm.
post-adjudication work. And I actually see that, I think the department of the group is supposed to consult with us.
I
I'm not
guess I'll
sure
wait
whether- yeah, I think
until
that-
Derek testifies next week and ask him if he thinks we need that. And finally, there were some concerns about the information that would be public versus what's private. Do you have any thoughts on that subject that I think Senator Baruch spoke to more eloquently than perhaps I did?
Well, maybe I could start by speaking a bit to some specific wording in that section
Okay.
of the bill,
Yeah.
and then happy to speak more broadly. So on page 15, this is in the section around record deletion
Right.
for pre-charge diversion. On line 8, there's a reference to a certified notice. So maybe I'll just back up. This provision here would have our office notify programs to delete records 2 years after, which we include that provision currently as it relates to other programs that we fund. I'm a little uncertain about the word certified, just in terms of how I would envision this working is we would inform programs monthly, perhaps with an encrypted email. Here are the people who completed the program 2 years ago, delete the records. So I just a little anxious about what
Note
certified.
to perhaps the leak certified.
And in the subsequent paragraphs, subsection C, as I understand, when it comes to pre-charge juvenile, there would be nothing that is public. If upon referral, a pre-charge case becomes confidential, that would mean the public does not have access to any of that information.
But they're juveniles, right?
Right, so I don't,
So they wouldn't have access
access
to anything,
anything.
or they shouldn't have access.
Exactly.
So this is where it becomes a problem, but the police have a record of that, but it's as a juvenile, And would the police have a record if the juvenile was found to be a delinquent? And would that record, that particular part of the record be sealed when they're 18? Or in case of now we've raised the age. But my point is that records are sealed if you are convicted in juvenile court
Yes.
after you turn 18 or whatever the time is. When they're sealed, it takes a court order to get them unsealed.
Correct.
And I want to understand that we're opening these juvenile records of people who've never been convicted of delinquent acts, never even been charged with a delinquent act. Are they going to be more open to law enforcement than if they had been convicted and had completed or whatever happened within the juvenile system? Even if they screwed up in the juvenile system, they're still sealed. So we're setting it up, in my view, the more I think about this section, we're setting it up so there's more availability to even law enforcement than they would have under the law if the person were convicted of a delinquent act and treated in the juvenile system.
I have concerns about this paragraph. I think it's in the narrower sense, even Senator Sears, I don't think it's necessary because it's allowing law enforcement to retain their records, but only delete public information. I don't think there is anything that is public at that point.
So there's no public information anyway.
And I don't think our office should have to send a notice to law enforcement to delete something that doesn't exist. In the broader realm of the point you just made, Senator Sears, I would agree that I do think there is an inequity there to retain law enforcement access to incidents that were never even charged compared to sealing of incidents where youth was found.
I think the two should match. In other words, the court access, you need court access to get to the records of a juvenile. So if the kid has completed the pre-charge program, then it should be the same as if it no longer exists. The two should be the same, whatever process we use. And I believe it's a court, you have to get a court order to, I think I'm correct. You have to get a court order. So there should be a court order to get to those records. I know the police aren't gonna like that, but that's the way this is just for the juvenile.
This is the juvenile section.
Right.
What section might that be?
It's on page 15.
Page 15, lines 10 through 15.
Because I can remember having a juvenile file in my office locked. No one had access to it except for the clerk who would come down and either remove records upon notification from the court that they spend.
Yeah.
So no one ever had access to that to begin with.
Yeah.
And the way that I read this is, it says within the 30 days after the 2-year anniversary, law enforcement and the state attorney's office will just upon successful completion, because it's just not all law enforcement, the bad people here, obviously, that the Attorney General should provide a certified notice, all public records by law enforcement agencies, which is that drawer I have, the locked filing cabinet shall be removed.
Yeah.
That was never, so I'm not quite sure why I read into it, and when they refer to public records, do not include the Valcourt database. I'm sure you're familiar with Valcourt, and or CAD, as it used to be known as.
Yes.
The public doesn't have access to those records to begin with.
I think the intent here was to find, I think the idea here was to allow law enforcement to continue to access law enforcement records, but not to allow the public to access records. But
they're not allowed.
I agree. So I think this is redundant language.
Well, not only
And
is
there's
it
the
redundant,
policy issue
but if
of-
it's giving law enforcement the ability to access those records, it is not the same as if the 15-year-old is charged with vandalism
Yes.
and is, the decision is to divert that 15-year-old and pre-charge, then why aren't the police records expunged and be complete? Because if the 15-year-old charged of vandalism is charged with a delinquent act and then goes into DCF custody, that is sealed forever without a court record. I mean, you can go to court and get the record, if that's what the law enforcement needs to do, so.
Well, and I think I have varying opinions on this, obviously, but I think I'm sure we're gonna get the witnesses as to why.
Yeah, well, I think we need to understand why it's different.
Exactly.
And I think I'm correct on the juvenile.
That's my understanding.
Double check the process for court order, but I know it's a court order required.
And similarly, if a
After they turn 18, it's not, you know, they can get, the police still have a record that they can access before the child is 18.
And if I may add, if a youth is charged with a delinquency and is referred to court diversion and completes diversion successfully, that is then expunged.
Right.
2 years.
So it'd be kind of unfair to
For the people who haven't even
been convicted.
not even
Or
charged.
charged, yeah, right, charged. That's right.
So, if I might, one of the problems that I used to deal with and have, obviously, is I sat on court conversion boards, I've sat on parity boards, you know, the whole gamut is, during the course of, as we well know, a lot of students sign contracts with their schools and so on and so forth. And I dealt directly with the Attorney General's office on this because if one of our local athletes, star athletes, doesn't matter what gender they may be, got issued not even tickets no more, they actually issued a 8.5 by 11 to
The
appear
notice,
to.
right, the underage
possession.
possession program.
And so there's numerous people at this game, more importantly students, who are fully aware of this fact, that that individual had been caught while consuming alcohol. And he or she was the starting pitcher for the playoff games. So we couldn't at least allow the school or something to say, hey, wait a minute, there's no mechanism. So basically that person knew that they had free ride because of the confidentiality clause. You understand what I'm saying? And more importantly, the other students watching the game knew that, hey, they can't do anything to that student because there's a confidentiality clause in here. And I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but I'm saying what message are we sending to our youth where they've signed this, they've committed to this, they've been caught, everybody knows it. That's as far as it goes. When I contact the agency's office, they say, well, there's a confidentiality clause. I said, well, I can respect that, but how do we deal with that moving forward?
It's interesting it's an interesting story because I've heard some similar anecdotes where then the school will do it because the school personnel knew something happened in a certain setting and they follow their procedures. And then the youth goes through it. So in that program, there's a screening. And then if there's a concern about substance use, there's a referral to a clinician. So I think there can be sort of complementary responses in the same way, like your parents might have a certain response even though you're going through a program. So it's interesting that the school didn't feel that they had
The first
that
place the
option.
school calls is law enforcement agency.
Right, and they turn to the law enforcement.
Well, the
Yeah.
halls are alive, they're talking, you know, it was this agency, that agency, the person who was picked up and call it agency.
Yeah.
Say, well, you know, love to work with you on this one, but I can't, our hands are tied. I just don't feel it's right message. Anyways, I don't want to hold up the whole process.
Well, it's not. So who's, on page 35, juvenile diversion program, these are kids who, there's another pre-charge diversion records deletion.
I think that may be the adult section.
Yeah, that was,
this year.
Well, but
an
it says
oversight on my part.
no later
Oh,
than
there
10
is.
days after the pre-charge
Oh, right.
diversion program, the juvenile division.
Yeah, it shouldn't be juvenile.
I said no,
That was just, that's what I was saying.
Okay. But it seems to do, that provides the information about the police. But you wouldn't have public records in this case either, would you?
No, because it's all, I mean,
It's all
well, as I
pre-charge.
understand, upon referral, it becomes confidential, which I believe by definition means it's not public.
The case is confidential itself, but the records still exist.
Because it's in the phone.
Right, but they still exist for juveniles as well. That's sort of like the distinction here is that there's confidentiality, meaning the case can't be spoken about, but the records themselves still exist from the moment that there's an interaction with law enforcement. You know, there's gonna be a police report, there's gonna be, maybe there's a probable cause affidavit. So those are the records that are deleted. In addition to anything else that may have been produced by the prosecutor or whatever. So there's the confidentiality of the process of diversion, which is what under this confidentiality speaks to. But then there's the non-public nature of juvenile proceedings or delinquency proceedings, which is kind of a different concept itself. And all of those are dealt with the public records exemptions and all of that. So it's these different terms of privacy, if you will, that kind of run along parallel tracks. The confidentiality is the process of diversion, but the record deletion is anything that is produced during that confidential process or prior to it becoming confidential. Does that make sense?
If I may add, my understanding, so I'll speak within the realm of court diversion and post-charge, it would exist upon referral, that case is confidential, but no, the public, those records, it still exists, but they are not accessible to the public. So my understanding was confidential means that the public has access. So I would think if in this bill, the language is a pre-charge, the record becomes confidential, then the public does not have access to that. Law enforcement prosecutors would, but not the public, is my understanding.
Right, and that's what the deletion portion takes care of, is those agencies that do have access to those records or have a limited purpose to delete them in their entirety as outlined here. You know, with the preservation, at least from the law enforcement prosecutor perspective, the non-public records. You know, and what was testified is that, well, sometimes when someone is apprehended, there's a Facebook post. So like those records would be deleted, but the internal records, police reports, investigation, affidavits, whatever may be produced, those would be the ones.
I mean, the Facebook wouldn't be deleted.
It would be deleted.
How can you delete? Oh, the police agency issues the.
Exactly.
Right, but they're not supposed to do that anyway with youth.
Well, they may not know that prior to them being charged.
Bristol police did it, I can remember complaining.
Well, they may not list the name, but they could post about the incident.
Bristol did the whole 9 yards.
So yes, that would be them.
For vandalizing a dugout.
There's one other provision I would like to speak to. Sorry,
Okay,
Susan,
please
we have
do.
time.
Yeah.
Excuse me, this is on page, towards the end of the bill, page 58.
Going right to the back.
To the back. So in sections 7 and 8 are the provisions relating to our office's responsibility for funding pre-charge. And our office thinks that diversion would work best if we fund one organization per county. I recognize that that would require a transition in certain counties where there are multiple providers doing some degree of pre-charge currently. And I would suggest that we have a year to help make that transition happen. The way the bill is written, it requires our office to fund every existing pre-charge provider, even if they're only doing a small bit of pre-charge.
Okay, how many do you currently?
We fund 12 organizations.
So we have a combination in Essex and Grand Island.
Correct.
So it's not all 14.
Correct. So I would recommend striking section 8 in its entirety. which would retain earlier language in the bill that would require our office to fund one organization to serve, a single entity to serve a county, and that in section 7, the date of July 1st be moved up perhaps to March, such that during the coming year, our organization would work with those communities where there are multiple organizations.
Yeah, I'm in a different position because we only have one county, so it doesn't get affected.
Well, and I think Willa may have been about to get to my point, because that was my concern, is living in a highly, well, by Vermont standards, highly populated county that has multiple agencies. How would this shift to
Well,
one
we'll
per
be
county impact the
We've
work
got
being
5
done in
minutes.
Chittenden County?
So what I think would be, what I would envision is more of a streamlining of administration and provision of services, which wouldn't necessarily mean that there might not be multiple sites or organizations in a county, but that they would work together under one, I'm gonna use the word umbrella for lack of a better word. There'd be one grant, they would all follow the same requirements, they would work together so that the information sharing happened. And it would be something I think that in individual counties would be unique discussions done locally with the support of our office about how do we in Chittenden County with 4 organizations make this work? And what does it mean in Windham County when we have an organization in Brattleboro and one in Bellows Falls? What does that mean?
That's helpful, and I certainly support, streamlining and unifying, and, I, on a couple of occasions last year and this year, sort of likened a more ideal system being one sort of like our designated agency system, where it's in every county, it's sort of got a larger umbrella, and I wonder if a year is enough time to make the transition from where we are now to where we hope to be in that way.
I think it could be ambitious, especially in Chittenden County, but I think there are also some counties where the current amount of pre-charge is minimal, and to set up a whole structure to accommodate funding an organization that may be getting 20 referrals is not is not efficient. And there's value to having pre-charge in the same organization.
Those green lights and those sweet bells are ringing for us. So if you could meet with Ben
Yes.
prior to the meeting and give them some